My name is Kat Davis, and this is a shorter segment of Surviving Service called Seeds for Change. Seeds for Change is an opportunity to provide a little bit shorter content that you can just kind of listen to on the go. You can save and refer back to whenever you need it. It's going to have some tips and tricks and tools and words we might need to describe the chaos, things that you might find helpful for grounding, things like that. So this is our little nugget, or a little something, a little seed that you can plant and come back and water, harvest as you go, however you want to engage with that metaphor. This first segment of Seeds of Change is all about developing a shared language and common understanding around what Erin and I mean when we talk about service. It's super important to develop any kind of shared language before you dive into community action or building, because you all need to know what you're building a community around and for. And it might seem really obvious, like, yeah, we all know what service is. We kind of get what you mean when you say that. Or you might be wondering, like, I just want to get into the action. I just want to get into the tools. I want to start commiserating. Let's just get started. Why are we taking the time to do this? I get it, but this is important. And I'm going to offer a few classic examples as to why this is so important to develop a shared language and understanding before diving into collective action. So that way, at least you get like a tool out of this in addition to understanding better what we mean by service. So for my first example of why it's so important to develop a shared language, I would love for you, dear listener, to consider for a moment, what does the acronym BLM mean to you? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear BLM? Well, for me, in 2021, when I was still in Idaho, I was collaborating with a colleague at the county level on an Earth Day event, and they talked about wanting to invite BLM to attend this event. I was super excited. I was like, yes, I know the organizers of the Boise chapter of the Black Lives Matter movement. I think they would love to be here. That would be great. What a powerful message to send, to bring them to an Earth Day event at the university. Super cool. I think the students are going to be stoked. They were talking about the Bureau of Land Management. That's an important distinction. Those are not the same things. So that was one example that really stood out to me as, let's make sure we're on the same page before we go further and start reaching out to people. You're probably like, yes, acronyms do that. That happens all the time. Another example, a more recent example, one of my favorite examples of this issue is recently I had a great hour-long meeting with a representative from my HR department at the school district where I work, talking about how we might be able to figure out how to pay teachers to be climate champions. Throughout this conversation, I learned that there are actually already positions out there that are climate specialists at schools. I was like, this is so cool. My work here is done. By the end of the conversation, when we were talking about action items and next steps, we uncovered that I was talking about climate change champions, people who are then paid to be at the school level to get students and staff really excited and stoked to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce their waste, things like that. What she was talking about was school climate champions, which, if anyone out there is in K-12, you've probably heard this term a lot. I was new to the public education space, so that's not what I associated it with. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, school climate actually refers to the quality of life at school. It's around building a safe and supportive school environment. Now, I can argue for days that climate change directly impacts school climate. For the purpose of this conversation, that argument doesn't really matter, and we had to actually start over because we were fully talking about two completely different positions. Again, same word, completely different meaning depending on the context. So the moral of the story is, whenever you're setting up a community space or about to work with people on a really exciting initiative, not only to make that initiative more accessible for people who are coming at it with different lived experiences and knowledges, but also just to make sure y'all are talking about the same climate, I highly recommend starting with defining what you're talking about. So with that being said, let's dive in. I'm going to break the fourth wall again and talk to you directly. Yes, you. Service. What does it mean to you? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What counts as service? Depending on your lived experience, it might bring for you completely different connotations than it would for others around you. So in our first episode, Erin and I really explicitly talked about service as nonprofit service, public service, military service, volunteer service, things like that. It can also be things like mental health care, healthcare in general, community organizing, customer service. I've had people come up to me and say, I do this and this and this. Does that count as service? For me, and what my answer has been, and what the intention of this space really is, that service is really any kind of community care or people care job or work or practice. Basically anywhere where you give a piece of your heart to the work that you do. So surviving service is a plea for us to take a moment to pause. It's about understanding that the more a role requires you to care deeply, the more potential it has for exploiting your passion, for taking your energy and for snuffing your spark. On the flip side, the more a role inspires you to care deeply, the more energizing and rewarding and spark generating it can be. The part that's really challenging, and what I'm here to shed light on as a person who works in this kind of role specifically, is that oftentimes the roles that are the most rewarding and spark generating can also be the most draining and exhausting and even toxic places to be. Again, we're not here to call out any one space or person. It's about work culture. It's about the system that is set up to take. And it's really hard to be in a role where you have to give so much of yourself in a system that just takes. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about surviving service. How can we make sure that we create spaces at work, at home, among friends, in volunteer roles, with our customers, with our clients, with our community, that is reciprocal, where we are giving and they are feeling nourished and energized and excited. If you have the opportunity to supervise others, really think about this too. How are you setting the example for them to replenish their spark? How are you actively participating in helping them cultivate that spark and keep it going? What are the practices that we can all do to better serve ourselves and serve each other in a way that can just take a little bit of that weight off of our shoulders, take a little bit of that edge off of our anxiety, put just a little bit of a nice cozy blanket on some of that hurt. It's not going to heal everything. There's still a whole system out here that's trying to tear us apart. But surviving service is about trying to find that inner peace and protect that peace and help others protect their peace so that we can continue showing up to do the important work. And again, this doesn't have to just be volunteer service, nonprofit service, public service, that kind of usual space that you would think about. Some people that I've talked to since releasing our first episode that have resonated with this idea of service include our usual suspects like colleagues in public service, education, what have you. But also I've spoken with a media relations manager who has been a lifelong journalist in newsrooms and who became a journalist out of a deep desire to serve her community by uncovering the truth and sharing her community's stories. If you want to talk about a work environment that is toxic, that does require you to have quite a bit of spark and a deep care for your job, look no further than a newsroom. I've also spoken with people who work in hospitals in different roles, some that are patient-facing, some that are behind the scenes, and many of them have bounced around from organization to organization, trying to find a space where they can just use their skills in service of community health without sacrificing their own well-being. Especially since the COVID-19 pandemic. Especially in states where healthcare is now becoming less accessible and more political. Who does it serve when people who want to care for others at their most dire cannot care for themselves? The sense of service has really resonated with customer service employees as well, jobs that are really designed to take and where you're supposed to really put a lot of your own humanity on the back burner. That could be anything from whether you're a cashier or a manager of a store or answering phones. And I'll share a little anecdote about my time in customer service and when I worked in a spark generating place and how that place transitioned to be spark draining. So I paid for rent in college as a cashier at a local independent grocery store in Boulder, Colorado. I loved my coworkers and they became some of my best friends to this day. I cared deeply about doing a job well at this time. You can insert whatever psychological profile you want about perfectionism and trauma here, but I wanted to do well, I wanted to show up, I wanted to help. I didn't want to just be in a job where I was held time hostage all day, and I just had to clock in and zone out for 8 hours and clock out. I wanted to contribute. So when the store was still small and independent, it was actually a really fun place to work. It was great to see our regular customers come through, and yeah, there were totally stressful times. That always happens. And there was plenty to rant about at our Margarita Mondays, but overall it was a pretty good gig. I remember that I had one particular manager who took our role in the community very seriously, especially as cashiers. He held the perspective that our store is where people found nourishment. It's where they got supplies for their best memories with their families in life, and it is where they are connecting with and supporting local farmers and entrepreneurs. It's really where they connect with community. A very ambitious and lovely vision of what a neighborhood grocery store can look like and serve. I did think this was just a little extra I was like, chill out. It's just a grocery store. But when the theater shooting happened in Aurora, Colorado in 2012, that sense of community and stability felt really heavy and important. When there was a catastrophic flood in Boulder in 2013 and people were displaced, I was displaced. Anyone who could show up for work did. And at that time, it became very prescient how we really were the gatekeepers for the community to access what they needed to survive. Us being opened during that time allowed the community to find a place of stability amidst a crisis. I have all sorts of feelings about how much one is paid to show up in a flood, to work, but that aside, if we can look at that sense of stability that you're providing, it can be a very cool thing and important thing. And unfortunately, when that store moved from independent to corporate, it totally changed. It started to transition into more of a job that felt like what you typically think about as a customer service job, one where you're expected to just put on a smile and look busy and feel micromanaged and have yourself kind of pulled around. I ended up doing a lot of work that was pretty well above my pay grade, taking on a lot of responsibilities that I wasn't being compensated for. And over time, it just became like any other customer service job. And I honestly grew pretty frustrated and resentful. And honestly, at that time, I could have really used somebody that said, hey, I know you're giving your heart to something, and it's not giving much back, and that's why this hurts. So all of that to say, whether you're a teacher or a grassroots manager or a gas station cashier or a zoo maintenance tech or a respiratory therapist or a barber, you serve the community. You provide the spaces and services that people need to continue on with their day, services to provide them with a sense of wonder, a sense of connection to the larger world, and services that literally save their lives, services that bring them back to their sense of self. Who does it serve for any of us to be disconnected from our humanity in these roles because of toxic work environments or untenable workloads? Because this is just the way it's always been, is supposed to be good enough. If we can just reimagine the way we work together in spaces of service, we can create fulfilling, manageable, self-sustaining, powerful movements of care and change. If we can just remember the deep connection and humanity of people in their service roles, we can take a step back from treating them with disrespect or with vitriol because we meet them with grace and try to remember that they're doing their best, and sometimes their best is literally just showing up another day. I'm really hoping that the people out there who supervise staff can remember this. I'm hoping the people out there who work on teams can remember this. The people who interact with students, the people who interact with people who are in need. Sometimes the best you can do is just show up, and how can you make that space a space worth showing up to? So now more than ever, we need to connect with that humanity. We need to connect with that sense of self-care. We need to see one another in these roles as individuals doing our best to show up and lifting each other up. Because who does it serve for each of us in these service roles to give up our hope, to give up our sparks? With what feels like a hugely uncertain and scary future, what with climate change and elections and economic disparity, you name it, it's scary. We need to commit to ourselves and each other. And now I'd like to offer a few words of affirmation to keep us going. We will survive. We will survive together. We will not let the system snuff our spark. Whether it is surviving out of hope or surviving out of spite, we will survive our service. Thank you for showing up today. Take care, take the time you need, take a nap, but just know that together, we got this. Surviving Service is independently created and produced by Kat Davis and Aaron Riley. Join the community and spark new connections by following us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at surviving_service, and reach out to share your own stories of service-driven work, all the things that make us laugh and cry, all the tips, tools, and tricks to get through by sending them to survivingservicepod@gmail.com. Together, we will go from surviving to thriving. Hang in there, we got this.